I'm Hazel Coleman, 30 years old, and I thought I'd finally made it. After 5 years of grinding as a data analyst eating instant noodles to save every dime, I bought my first home in Salem, Oregon. I can still feel the keys in my hand, the pride swelling in my chest as I unlocked the door to my house. My reward for years of sacrifice, a court summons from my own parents. They dragged me to court claiming I betrayed them by buying a home without their permission. Their permission. Can you believe that I stood in that courtroom staring at my mom and dad across the aisle, their faces cold like I was some stranger who'd stolen from them, all because I dared to make a decision for myself? The betrayal cut deep, but it wasn't just the lawsuit. They took it further, airing their grievances online, painting me as the ungrateful daughter in our small town's Facebook groups. It wasn't about money, it was about control. They'd spent my whole life dictating my every move, and this was their way of pulling me back in. I wasn't going to let them win. I fought back not just for my house, but for my freedom. Want to know how it all went down? Stick around, because this story gets wild. If you've ever felt trapped by family expectations, drop a comment about it below. Where are you watching from? Hit that like button and subscribe to follow this insane journey to tell you how this started. Let me take you back to my childhood in Salem. Growing up in Salem, Oregon, in a middle-class family, my life was ruled by my parents, Patricia Kent and Donald Kent. Everything, every birthday dollar, every new pair of shoes had to be approved under their mantra of family consensus. It wasn't about sharing, it was about control. I remember this one time when I was little, I got a book for my birthday, a beautiful hardcover about space exploration. I'd spend hours flipping through it, dreaming of stars. But one day my mom Patricia snatched it off my shelf. "This isn't suitable for the family's values," she said, her voice sharp like I'd committed some crime. I begged her to give it back, tears streaming down my face, but she just locked it away in her office. I never saw it again. That moment stuck with me, a quiet wound that never fully healed. My older brother, Christopher Kent, who I just called Chris, had it worse. A few years older than me, he was always pushing back. He'd argue with Dad Donald over every little thing, why he couldn't buy a skateboard, why his allowance vanished into their family account. Those fights were loud dishes clattering in the kitchen as voices rose. "You're part of this family," Christopher Mom would yell. Chris would storm off, slamming doors. By the time he finished high school, he'd had enough. One night, after a screaming match about his college plans, he packed a bag and left for Portland. I was still a kid, watching from my bedroom door, heart pounding as his car peeled out of the driveway. He barely looked back. With Chris gone, the house felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. Mom and Dad turned their focus on me, their last tether to control. Every Christmas gift, every report card, every choice I made was scrutinized. They'd sit me down at the dining table, going over my contributions to the family, as if my existence was a ledger they needed to balance. I wasn't allowed to spend my own birthday money without their approval. Once I saved up from chores to buy a journal, something just for me. I hid it under my mattress, but Mom found it during one of her room checks. She didn't take it, but she lectured me for an hour about how secrets weren't part of our family's way. I learned to keep my dreams small, tucked away, where they couldn't see. School was my only escape, but even that came with strings. I loved math, the way numbers made sense when nothing else did. Teachers said I had a knack for it, and I started imagining a future where I could make my own choices. But at home, every step forward felt like a battle. Mom and Dad had this way of making me feel guilty for wanting anything outside their plan. "We're doing this for your future," Dad would say, his voice calm but heavy like a judge passing a sentence. I'd nod, swallowing my arguments because fighting back never worked. Chris had tried, and he was gone. I didn't want to lose what little I had left. Their control wasn't just about money, it was about owning every piece of me. My clothes. They picked them, saying my choices were too flashy. My friends. They had to meet Mom and Dad first, and most didn't pass their test. I remember one girl, Sarah, who I'd eat lunch with in middle school. She was funny, always sneaking me extra cookies from her lunchbox. But Mom called her a bad influence after one visit and banned me from hanging out with her. I stopped inviting people over after that. It was easier to keep to myself than to watch my world shrink further. Looking back, I see how their rules shaped me. I became cautious, always second-guessing myself, afraid to step out of line. But even as a kid, I felt this spark inside, a quiet rebellion that refused to die. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, promising myself that one day I'd break free. Chris had shown me it was possible to walk away, even if it cost him everything. I just needed to find my own way out. After I graduated from high school, my first job was at a local bookstore, a cozy place with creaky shelves and the smell of old paper. I was thrilled to earn my own money stacking books and helping customers find their next read. It felt like a small taste of independence, a chance to carve out something for myself. But that feeling didn't last long. Mom and Dad, Patricia and Donald, had other plans. They demanded I hand over 70% of every paycheck to what they called the family fund. "It's for our future," Mom would say, her voice firm, as if I had no say in the matter. I'd bring home a few $100s a month, and most of it went straight to them, leaving me with barely enough for a coffee. They didn't stop there. My parents insisted on linking my bank account to theirs, claiming it was easier to manage my finances. Every withdrawal, every purchase had to go through their approval. I once bought a new pair of sneakers with my own money, only to face an hour-long lecture from Dad about irresponsible spending. He sat me down at the kitchen table, scrolling through my bank statement on his laptop, pointing out every transaction like I was a child caught stealing cookies. "Why do you need these?" he asked, holding up the receipt I'd foolishly left on the counter. I mumbled some excuse, my face burning, knowing no answer would satisfy him. It wasn't about the money, it was about keeping me under their thumb. When it came time to apply for college, I saw a chance to escape. I'd spent hours researching schools, dreaming of studying data analysis at a university in Seattle or California, somewhere far from Salem's suffocating grip. I'd lie on my bed flipping through brochures, imagining a life where I could make my own choices. But when I showed Mom the applications, her face tightened. "Out-of-state schools are too expensive," she said, tossing the papers aside. "You'll go to the community college here. It's practical." I tried to argue, my voice shaking, explaining that I'd applied for scholarships, that I could make it work. Dad cut me off. "We're not wasting family resources on your whims," he said, his tone final. I felt my dreams shrink, folded away like those brochures now crumpled in the trash. I ended up at the local community college studying math and computer science, subjects I loved but felt tainted by their control. Every semester they reviewed my course schedule, questioning why I needed certain classes. Why not something more practical, like accounting? Mom would ask, her pen tapping the table as she scrutinized my choices. I'd bite my lip, nodding, because arguing only made things worse. They paid for my tuition, but it came with strings. Every grade, every decision was theirs to judge. I felt like a puppet, my strings pulled tighter with every passing year. Meanwhile, my brother Chris was gone. After his blowout fight with our parents, he'd left Salem for Portland right after his own high school graduation. I hadn't heard from him since, not a single call or letter. His absence left a hole in our house, a silent reminder of what happened when you defied Mom and Dad. I missed him, but I also envied him. He'd escaped, even if it meant cutting ties completely. I was left to face their scrutiny alone, their expectations pressing down like a weight I couldn't shake. Once I tried asking Mom why Chris left, hoping for some insight. She snapped, "He was selfish. Don't be like him." The conversation ended there, and I never brought it up again. The bookstore job became my lifeline, the one place where I felt a sliver of control. I'd slip a few dollars from my tips into a hidden envelope tucked inside a hollowed-out novel on the store's back shelf. It wasn't much, maybe $20 a month, but it was mine. I'd dream about saving enough to move out, to start a life where I didn't have to justify every penny. But even that small act of rebellion felt risky. If Mom or Dad found out, I knew they'd see it as betrayal, another reason to tighten their grip. Looking back, those years taught me something critical. My parents' control wasn't just about money, it was about erasing my ability to choose. Every paycheck I handed over, every dream I buried, chipped away at who I was. But that spark of defiance, the one I'd felt as a kid, was still there. I didn't know how I'd break free, but I knew I had to try. Working at the bookstore, hiding those few dollars, was my first step towards something bigger. A few years later, I took my boldest step yet. I'd just graduated from community college with a degree in computer science, landing a job as a data analyst at a small tech firm in Salem, Oregon. For the first time, I was earning a real salary, $60,000 a year, enough to dream bigger than hidden envelopes in bookstores. I decided to rent my own apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a quiet part of town. Signing the lease felt like a rebellion, my signature a declaration that I could make choices without Mom and Dad's approval. I moved in with a single suitcase, a folding chair, and a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. For a moment, I thought I'd finally escaped their grip. That hope didn't last. When I told Mom and Dad about the apartment, their faces turned to stone. "Renting is throwing money away," Dad said, his voice low and sharp, like I'd insulted him. Mom crossed her arms, adding, "You should have stayed home and saved for the family." I tried explaining that I needed my own space, that I was 22 and ready to live independently, but they brushed me off. "You're not thinking straight," Mom said, her words slicing through my excitement. They didn't stop there. They insisted on helping with my mail, claiming it was easier if they collected it at their house. I'd find my bank statements, already opened my bills marked with their notes. Once I got a credit card offer in the mail, and Dad called me that same night, demanding to know why I'd even consider applying for it without their input. Their control felt suffocating, but I didn't see how deep it ran until I met up with my friend, Sean Murphy. I'd known Sean since high school, a guy who always had a quick laugh and a knack for cutting through nonsense. We grabbed coffee one afternoon, and I vented about my parents' reaction to the apartment. Sean leaned back, sipping his latte, and said, "Hazel, that's not normal. Parents don't get to control your mail or your life at this age. You're not their property." His words hit like a lightning bolt. I'd always thought their rules were just how families worked, but Sean's blunt honesty made me question everything. He told me about his own move to an apartment, how his parents cheered him on, not tore him down. For the first time, I saw my parents' behavior for what it was: not love, but manipulation. That conversation with Sean was a turning point, the moment I realized I had to break free. I started small, but deliberate. My first move was opening a new bank account, one Mom and Dad couldn't touch. I went to a local credit union, hands shaking as I filled out the paperwork. I'd been conditioned to feel guilty for keeping anything from them, but I pushed through, transferring my savings, every penny I'd managed to keep from my bookstore days and my new job. When Dad noticed my paycheck wasn't going into the old joint account, he called me furious. "What are you hiding from us?" he demanded, his voice booming through the phone. I stammered, trying to explain it was just practical, but he cut me off. "This is a betrayal of the family," he said, and hung up. Mom followed up with a text, cold and pointed. "We raised you better than this." I sat on my bare apartment floor, staring at my phone, my stomach twisting with guilt and defiance. Their reaction only hardened my resolve. I stopped forwarding my mail to their house, setting up a P.O. box instead. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. My first real step toward cutting their strings. Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced one day, holding a stack of my redirected mail. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, her eyes narrowing as she handed me the envelopes. I took them without a word, my heart racing, but I didn't back down. I started redirecting every piece of my life bills, subscriptions, even junk mail, to my new address. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Still, their disapproval hung over me like a shadow. They'd call, asking why I wasn't visiting more, why I was pulling away. Every conversation was a minefield, their questions laced with judgment. I'd lie awake in my apartment wondering if I was wrong to want this freedom. But Sean's words echoed in my mind, reminding me that my life wasn't theirs to control. I began to see a future where I could make my own choices, where my dreams didn't need their permission. That vision kept me going even as their voices tried to pull me back. For 5 years, I'd been squirreling away every spare dollar from my data analyst job, living on instant noodles and secondhand furniture to save for something monumental. I didn't tell Mom or Dad, knowing they'd try to stop me. At 27, I bought a small house in the quiet suburbs of Salem, Oregon, a 2-bedroom fixer-upper with a tiny backyard. The day I signed the papers, my hands shook, not from fear but from a rush of freedom. I walked through the empty rooms, imagining a life where I called the shots. I'd done this on my own, no family consensus required. To celebrate, I decided to invite Mom and Dad for dinner, hoping to share my pride, maybe even bridge the gap between us. The evening started innocently enough. I cooked spaghetti, set the table with mismatched plates, and waited for them to arrive. When they walked in, Mom scanned the house, her lips pursed while Dad's eyes darted to every corner like he was auditing the place. I took a deep breath and said, "I bought this house. It's mine." For a moment there was silence, heavy and thick. Then Mom's face twisted. "You did what?" She snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the plates rattle. "You didn't ask us," he said, his tone low and accusing. "This is a family decision." I tried to explain that I'd saved for years, that it was my money, my choice, but they weren't listening. "You've gone behind our backs," Mom said, her eyes blazing. I stood there stunned as my moment of triumph crumbled. It got worse. Dad pulled out a thick manila folder from his bag labeled Family Records. He opened it, revealing pages of spreadsheets, every gift, every allowance, every cent they'd ever spent on me, from diapers to college tuition. "This is what we've done for you," he said, jabbing a finger at the numbers. "And you repay us by making decisions without us." Mom chimed in, her voice cold. "You owe us, Hazel. This house should be under family control." I stared at the folder, my heart pounding, realizing they'd been keeping score my entire life. They weren't just angry, they wanted to own my house, my independence, everything. I told them to leave, my voice shaking but firm. They stormed out, Mom muttering about my selfishness, Dad clutching his precious folder. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of notifications on my phone. Mom had posted in a local Salem Facebook group, one with thousands of members, neighbors, coworkers, people I'd known my whole life. "Our daughter has turned her back on us," the post read. "She bought a house without our permission, acting like we mean nothing. So ungrateful." Comments poured in, some calling me selfish, others speculating about my secret motives. Dad followed up with his own post, painting me as a spoiled kid who'd betrayed her family. I sat on my couch scrolling through the vitriol, my chest tight. These weren't just private arguments anymore. They were dragging my name through the mud for all of Salem to see. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but I knew responding would only fuel their fire. The public shaming stung, but it wasn't new. Their need to control had always been about power, not love. That folder, those posts, were just new weapons in their arsenal. I thought about calling them, begging them to stop, but something in me snapped. I wasn't a kid anymore, hiding journals or sneaking dollars. I'd bought a house with my own money, and they couldn't take that away. Still, their words echoed, making me question if I'd done something wrong. I spent nights pacing my new home, the joy of ownership tainted by their accusations. I knew I had to protect what I'd built, but I didn't know how far they'd go to take it back. A week later, I received a letter that left me speechless. It was a court summons delivered to my doorstep. My parents were suing me, claiming I'd disrespected the family by buying my house without their permission. They demanded legal control over the property, arguing it was a family asset since they'd supported me growing up. I sat at my kitchen counter, the paper trembling in my hands, reading their accusations over and over. Ungrateful, dishonest, betrayal, their words felt like a punch to the gut. I'd fought so hard for this house, my independence, and now they wanted to take it away in court. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I couldn't face this alone. I found Susan Riley, a local attorney with a reputation for handling messy family disputes. When I met her in her small, cluttered office, I poured out my story: years of control, the dinner disaster, their public attacks online. Susan, sharp and no nonsense, leaned forward and said, "This case is flimsy, but we need to dig deeper." She started investigating my parents' claims, and what she found shocked me. Mom and Dad were drowning in debt from bad real estate investments. They'd sunk money into rental properties that tanked, leaving them desperate for cash. Susan showed me documents proving their financial mess: liens, missed payments, a trail of bad decisions. "This lawsuit isn't about family honor," she said, tapping the papers. "They're after your house to bail themselves out." I felt betrayed all over again, realizing their fight was about their own survival, not my choices. Then out of nowhere, Chris showed up. I hadn't seen my brother since he left for Portland years ago, but he knocked on my door one evening, his face older but familiar. "I heard about the lawsuit," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm here to help." Over coffee at my tiny dining table, he told me his story. After college, Mom and Dad had pressured him to funnel his paychecks into their investments, promising it was for family security. When he refused, they cut him off, and he walked away for good. "They tried to control me the same way," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "You're doing the right thing, fighting back." His support felt like a lifeline the first time. I didn't feel alone in this mess. Chris offered to testify about their pattern of control, giving me a new surge of determination. I needed hard evidence to prove my financial independence, and that's where Sean came in. Unlike his role as my sounding board years ago, this time he took action. Sean, always good at digging up information, offered to help me track down records. We spent late nights combing through my old bank statements, pay stubs, and tax returns, piecing together proof that every dollar for the house came from my own savings. He even found a lease agreement from my apartment days showing I'd been financially independent long before the house purchase. "They can't claim you owe them when you've got this," Sean said, holding up a folder of documents. His help was invaluable, turning my scattered records into a solid defense. As the court date loomed, Susan drilled me on what to expect. She warned me that Mom and Dad would lean hard on their family duty argument, painting me as the ungrateful daughter. "They'll try to guilt you," she said, her voice firm. "Stay focused on the facts." I spent hours preparing, rehearsing my story, memorizing dates and figures. Every night, I'd lie awake imagining standing in front of a judge facing my parents across the courtroom. The thought of their cold stares made my stomach churn, but Chris's words echoed in my mind. "You're doing the right thing." I wasn't just fighting for my house. I was fighting for my life, my freedom to choose. The lawsuit felt like the final battle in a war I'd been fighting since childhood. Mom and Dad had controlled my money, my choices, my dreams for years, but this was different. They'd crossed a line, dragging me to court, exposing their own desperation. With Susan's expertise, Chris's support, and Sean's help, I felt ready not just to defend my house, but to take back my future. I didn't know how the judge would rule, but I knew I wouldn't go down without a fight. The day of the trial arrived and everything changed. I walked into the courtroom with a heavy heart. The Salem, Oregon courthouse was cold and imposing, its high ceilings echoing every step. I sat beside Susan, gripping my chair as my parents, Patricia and Donald, took their places across the room. Their faces were stone. Mom's eyes fixed on me with a mix of anger and disappointment, Dad clutching his familiar manila folder. Judge Nancy Holt, a stern woman with sharp eyes, called the room to order. My stomach churned, but Susan gave me a reassuring nod. I'd spent weeks preparing, armed with evidence of my financial independence, but facing my parents in court felt like confronting a lifetime of control. Mom and Dad's lawyer went first, presenting their case with theatrical flair. He waved their family records folder, claiming I'd betrayed them by buying my house without permission. "This family has always made decisions together," he said, holding up spreadsheets detailing every dollar they'd spent on me since childhood. Hazel's actions show disrespect, undermining their sacrifices. Mom nodded along, her lips tight, while Dad stared at me, expecting me to crumble. The argument felt like a twisted version of our dinner confrontation, their accusations now amplified for the court. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to interrupt, knowing Susan would handle it. When it was our turn, Susan stood calm and precise. She dismantled their case with surgical efficiency. "This folder proves nothing," she said, holding it up. "It's a list of expenses any parent might incur, not a legal claim to my client's property." She presented my bank statements, tax returns, and lease agreements, documents Sean had helped me compile, proving every cent for the house came from my savings as a data analyst. Then came the bombshell. Susan introduced records of my parents' financial troubles, failed real estate deals, mounting debts, and unpaid loans. "This lawsuit isn't about family values," she said, her voice steady. "It's a desperate attempt to seize Hazel's assets to cover their losses." The courtroom went silent. Mom's face flushed and Dad's jaw tightened, but they had no rebuttal. Judge Holt leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "I've heard enough," she said, her tone cutting through the tension. "This family records document lacks any legal standing. It's irrelevant to the ownership of Ms. Coleman's property." She turned to my parents. "Your financial difficulties do not entitle you to your daughter's assets. This case is dismissed." The gavel struck, and relief flooded through me, so intense I nearly collapsed. I'd won. My house, my independence, was mine. Susan squeezed my shoulder, whispering, "You did it." I looked at Mom and Dad, expecting some sign of remorse, but their faces were unreadable. As we left the courtroom, Mom grabbed my arm. "If you walk away from this, you're no longer our daughter," she said, her voice low and venomous. Dad stood behind her, nodding. "Choose carefully, Hazel," he added, his words heavy with finality. I froze, their threat slicing through my victory. For a moment, I felt like that little girl again, terrified of losing them. But then I remembered everything: their control, their manipulation, the public shaming. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady, despite the tears in my eyes. "I choose myself." I walked away, leaving them standing in the courthouse hall, their power over me broken. Outside, Sean was waiting, a wide grin on his face. "You crushed it," he said, pulling me into a hug. Unlike his earlier roles, offering advice or digging up documents, this time, he was there to celebrate his presence, a reminder of the support I'd found outside my family. We went to a diner nearby, and over greasy burgers he toasted to my freedom. "To your house, your life, your rules," he said, clinking his soda against mine. For the first time in years, I laughed without a weight on my shoulders. The victory wasn't just about the house, it was about reclaiming my life from their grip. Looking back, that day marked the end of my parents' hold over me. I'd spent my life bending to their rules, but the trial showed me who they really were. Their threats, their lawsuit, were the final proof that their love came with strings. Cutting contact wasn't easy. Guilt lingered, creeping in during quiet moments, but it was necessary. I heard later that their financial troubles forced them to sell their own house, their reputation tarnished in Salem after their public attacks on me. I didn't gloat. I just moved forward, building a life on my terms. After the victory, I returned to my house, but everything felt different. The trial had freed me from my parents' control, but it also left a void where family once stood. My house in Salem, Oregon was no longer just a building. It was a symbol of my independence, a place to rebuild my life. The weight of cutting ties with Mom and Dad lingered, but I was ready to move forward, to create a new sense of belonging. I turned to the people who mattered, starting with Chris, and opened my doors to the community I'd been too guarded to embrace before. Chris became my anchor. After years apart, we reconnected over long phone calls, sharing stories of our childhood and the pressures we'd both faced. He visited from Portland one weekend, bringing takeout pizza and a stack of old photos. We laughed over memories of sneaking comic books under the covers, a bond our parents couldn't break. "I'm proud of you," He said, his voice warm as we sat on my porch. "You did what I couldn't, stood up to them." Those words healed something in me, strengthening our relationship. Chris wasn't just my brother. He was proof that family could mean support, not control. We made plans to meet regularly, rebuilding what we'd lost. I also started connecting with my neighbors, something I'd avoided during the chaos of the lawsuit. The Parkers, a retired couple next door, invited me over for coffee one morning. They'd heard about the trial through Salem's gossip mill, but didn't pry. Instead, they shared stories of their own kids, offering a warmth I hadn't expected. Across the street, the Stone family parents with 2 teenagers welcomed me with a homemade pie after I helped them fix a flat tire. "You're one of us now," Mrs. Stone said, her smile genuine. These small gestures made my neighborhood feel like home, a community that saw me for who I was, not the drama Mom and Dad had spread. Speaking of my parents, their actions caught up with them. Their posts on the local Facebook group calling me selfish and ungrateful backfired. Neighbors and old friends saw through their narrative, especially after the lawsuit's outcome spread. People whispered about their failed real estate ventures, how they'd tried to seize my house to cover their debts. Their reputation in Salem crumbled, and I heard through a former coworker that they'd put their house on the market, unable to keep up with mounting bills. Part of me felt a pang of sadness. They were still my parents, but their choices had consequences. They'd built their lives on control, and when it failed, they lost the community's respect and their home. To mark my new beginning, I decided to host a housewarming party. I spent days cleaning my fixer-upper hanging string lights in the backyard and setting out folding tables with snacks. Chris came bringing a playlist of our favorite songs. The Parkers brought a casserole, and the Stones showed up with their kids, who ran around the yard with boundless energy. Other neighbors joined, their faces familiar from months of small talk. As the sun set, I stood on my porch, looking at the crowd, laughing and chatting. "This is my home," I said, raising a glass, my voice steady. "Thank you for being here." The cheers that followed felt like a seal on my independence, a moment of triumph after years of struggle. The party wasn't just about the house, it was about claiming my life surrounded by people who valued me for me. Looking back, the journey taught me a hard lesson: setting boundaries is painful but necessary. Growing up, I thought family meant obeying without question, but my parents' control over my money, my choices, my dreams showed me otherwise. Cutting them off wasn't about revenge, it was about protecting my peace. I learned that family isn't just blood, it's the people who lift you up, like Chris, the Parkers, and the Stones. I also learned to trust myself, to believe my choices were enough. The house, the lawsuit, the victory. They were steps toward a life I defined, not one dictated by others. To everyone who's followed my story, thank you. This wasn't easy to share, reliving the pain, the betrayal, the fight, but it's shown me how many others face similar struggles. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? How did you find the strength to choose yourself? Share in the comments, I'm reading everyone. Your stories remind me we're not alone, that we can build lives on our own terms no matter how hard the fight. This house is mine, and so is my future.